October 19, 1943. An American P-38 Lightning shudders across the sky above Foggia, southern Italy. Both Allison engines are streaming black smoke, the port engine missing badly, the starboard screaming at temperatures no engine should survive. Lieutenant Robert Chen from Sacramento fights the controls as the Mediterranean coastline blurs beneath him. He is 40 miles from friendly territory. He will not make it. At 4,000 feet, he makes the decision. Belly landing. He spots a field near an abandoned farmhouse, kills both engines, and rides the twin-boomed fighter down. The Lightning carves a 100-yard scar through Italian soil before grinding to a halt, surprisingly intact. Within 2 hours, Italian soldiers arrive. Within 6 hours, the aircraft is under armed guard. Within 24 hours, it sits in a hangar at Guidonia Airfield, northeast of Rome, and that is when something extraordinary happens. As Italy's finest fighter pilots gather around, this captured American aircraft, men who have flown combat missions over Malta, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, the initial curiosity gives way to something else entirely. Something that feels like disbelief, then respect, then something darker, a creeping realization that everything they have been told about twin-engine fighters, everything they have learned about aerial combat, everything they believe about their own capabilities might be dangerously, fatally wrong. One of them, a veteran ace named Capitano Luigi Gorrini, walks slowly around the Lightning 3 times. He touches the wing, examines the twin booms, studies the central nacelle. Then he turns to his fellow pilots and says something that sounds insane. If the Americans have 1,000 of these, we should surrender now. What could he have possibly discovered in this aircraft that led to such a devastating conclusion? Stay with me, because what these Italian pilots learned changed not just their tactics, but their entire understanding of the air war they were losing. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Before we understand what shocked these Italian pilots, you need to know what they expected to find. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning was unlike anything in the sky. Twin engines, twin booms, a central nacelle housing the pilot, and a devastating concentration of firepower. 4 50-caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose. No convergence issues, no harmonization problems, just point and shoot. American pilots called it the fork-tailed devil with pride. The Japanese feared it so intensely they called it 2 planes, 1 pilot. The Germans respected it enough to give it the nickname Gabelschwanz Teufel, the fork-tailed devil. But the Italians, they had been taught something very specific about twin-engine fighters, something drilled into every pilot from their first day of training. Twin-engine aircraft are bombers, reconnaissance planes, or heavy fighters. They are fast in a straight line, yes. They can carry heavy weapons, certainly. They have long range, absolutely. But they cannot dogfight. They cannot maneuver. They are too heavy, too sluggish, too cumbersome. In a turning fight, any single-engine fighter will destroy them. This was doctrine. This was fact. This was what every Italian fighter pilot knew with absolute certainty. The Regia Aeronautica, Italy's air force, had built its fighter doctrine around agility. Their primary fighter, the Machi C, 202 Folgore, was a masterpiece of Italian design. Sleek, lightweight, powered by a German Daimler-Benz inline engine built under license, it was fast, maneuverable, and beautiful. Italian pilots loved it. They took pride in it. In the hands of a skilled pilot, the Folgore could outturn almost anything in the sky. Against British Hurricanes and early Spitfires over Malta and North Africa, it had proven formidable. Against American P-40 Warhawks, it held its own. Italian fighter tactics emphasized the turning fight. Get close, force the enemy into a dogfight, use superior maneuverability to gain position, fire a short burst with your 20mm cannon and 12.7mm machine guns, then break away. Simple, elegant, effective, and absolutely lethal against heavy, cumbersome aircraft that could not turn. So, when Italian intelligence reported that the Americans were deploying twin-engine fighters as escorts for their bomber formations, the response was almost dismissive. Twin-engine fighters? Against our Macchis? They will be slaughtered. Some pilots even welcomed the news. Better to face clumsy twin-engine aircraft than the nimble single-engine Mustangs or Thunderbolts. The Regia Aeronautica had encountered P-38 seconds before, of course. Brief glimpses in combat over North Africa and Sicily. Long-range attacks where the Lightnings appeared, fired, and disappeared before Italian fighters could engage. But these were fleeting encounters. No Italian pilot had truly tested a P-38 inches sustained combat. No one had pushed it to its limits. No one had discovered what it could really do, until October 19th, 1943, when Lieutenant Chen's damaged Lightning made its forced landing and gave them the opportunity to find out. The aircraft that sat in the hangar at Guidonia Airfield was remarkably intact. The belly landing had damaged the landing gear, bent one propeller, and torn some skin panels. But the airframe was whole. Both engines, though damaged, were salvageable. The wings, tail surfaces, and control systems were functional. Italian mechanics and engineers descended on the Lightning with the intensity of surgeons performing an autopsy. They measured, photographed, and documented everything. The wingspan, 42 feet. The length, 37 feet 10 inches. The height at the tail, 9 feet, 10 inches. Empty weight, over 12,000 pounds. Maximum takeoff weight, over 17,000 pounds. One engineer, a man named Antonio Ferrara, did the calculations and looked up in shock. This aircraft weighs more than 2 Macchi Folgors combined. How does it even fly? But the wait was just the beginning. As they examined the Lightning's construction, the Italian engineers found themselves confronting American industrial capacity in physical form. The build quality was extraordinary. Panel fits were precise. Riveting was consistent throughout the airframe. Wiring harnesses were organized, color-coded, and labeled. The hydraulic systems were sophisticated, using components that required rare materials and precision manufacturing. The engines were especially revealing. Even damaged, the Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engines were impressive. Each produced over 1,400 horsepower with its turbocharger. The turbochargers themselves were technological marvels, sophisticated systems that compressed air at high altitudes, allowing the engines to maintain power where Italian fighters gasped. One Italian engineer later wrote in his report, and this is a direct translation from the original Italian, "The Americans have constructed this aircraft as if materials and skilled labor are unlimited. The attention to detail suggests either tremendous waste or industrial capacity beyond our comprehension." That phrase, industrial capacity beyond our comprehension, would haunt Italian aviation circles for the remainder of the war. But the engineers were just beginning their examination. What they discovered next would fundamentally challenge everything Italian pilots believed about aerial combat. The Italian test pilot selected to fly the captured Lightning was Capitano Luigi Gorrini, one of the Regia Aeronautica's most experienced and respected fighter pilots. By October 1943, Gorrini had already achieved 14 confirmed victories, flying Macchi C 202 Folgores over Malta and North Africa. He was known for his technical precision, his analytical mind, and his ability to evaluate aircraft objectively. Gorrini was also known for his honesty, sometimes brutally so. When the Regia Aeronautica had tested captured British Hurricanes earlier in the war, Gorrini had written a detailed report praising the Hurricane's ruggedness while noting its inferior maneuverability compared to Italian fighters. When they evaluated a captured Spitfire, he had acknowledged its excellent performance while identifying specific weaknesses Italian pilots could exploit. His superiors trusted his judgment. If Gorrini said an aircraft was dangerous, it was dangerous. If he said it had weaknesses, those weaknesses were real. So when Gorrini climbed into the cockpit of the captured P-38 for the first evaluation flight, everyone waited for his verdict. The flight was scheduled for late October 1943, after Italian mechanics had repaired the damaged engines, replaced the bent propeller, and patched the torn skin panels. The Lightning had been repainted in Italian markings, green and brown camouflage with white crosses on the wings and fuselage to prevent friendly fire incidents. Gorrini settled into the cockpit and immediately noticed the view. Compared to the Mach-E 202, with its somewhat restricted visibility due to the long nose and framed canopy, the P-38's greenhouse canopy offered exceptional visibility. He could see forward, to the sides, above, and with minimal head movement, behind. In aerial combat, where the first pilot to spot the enemy often lived and the second died, this was everything. He started both engines. The Allison V1710s rumbled to life with over 2,800 combined horsepower. The sound was different from the smooth purr of the Daimler-Benz in his Mach-E. Deeper, more powerful, more industrial. He advanced both throttles. The Lightning surged forward. Acceleration was impressive, far better than he expected from an aircraft this heavy. He pulled back on the control yoke. The nose lifted. At 90 miles per hour, the Lightning broke ground and climbed away from Guidonia Airfield. The first thing Gorrini noticed was the climb rate. Excellent, better than the Mach-E at most altitudes. He leveled off at 10,000 feet and began testing basic maneuvers. He rolled the aircraft left, then right. The ailerons were responsive, surprisingly so for such a heavy machine. Roll rate was good, not as crisp as the Mach-E, but far better than any twin-engine aircraft had any right to be. He pushed the control yoke forward into a shallow dive. The Lightning accelerated smoothly. No buffeting, no control flutter. The aircraft remained stable and responsive. He pulled up, climbed to 15,000 feet, and tested again. The performance actually improved at altitude. With the turbochargers feeding compressed air to both engines, the Lightning maintained power where Italian fighters began losing performance. Top speed at 15,000 feet was over 360 miles per hour, faster than the Mach-E 202, faster than almost anything Italy had. But Gorrini was looking for the weakness he knew had to be there. Twin-engine fighters cannot dogfight. That was the rule. That was doctrine. He was about to test whether the rule was wrong. He reduced power, slowed to combat maneuvering speed around 220 miles per hour, and attempted a sustained turn. He banked the Lightning into a hard left turn, pulling back on the control yoke to tighten the circle. And that is when everything he knew about twin-engine fighters shattered. The Lightning turned, not sluggishly, not reluctantly. It turned sharply, responsively, tightly. Gorrini, expecting the aircraft to wallow like a bomber, found himself in a genuine turning fight with an aircraft that should not be able to turn at all. He tightened the turn further, pulling harder, testing the limits. The Lightning kept turning. The controls stiffened somewhat at higher speeds, yes, but the turn rate was extraordinary for an aircraft weighing over 15,000 pounds. He reversed the turn, rolling right and pulling hard. The Lightning snapped into the opposite direction and sustained the turn without protest. Gorrini levelled out, his mind racing. This should not be possible. This should not work. Twin-engine fighters do not turn like this. But he was doing it. The aircraft was proving him wrong with every manoeuvre. He climbed to 20,000 feet and tested high-speed manoeuvres. At over 350 miles per hour, he attempted a sharp turn. The Lightning responded, not as quickly as at lower speeds, but it responded. It maintained control. It stayed coordinated. He tested the stall characteristics. Clean stall, wings level, was docile and predictable. With flaps extended, the stall was even more benign. He tested accelerated stalls in turns. The Lightning warned him with buffeting before braking, giving plenty of time to recover. He tested the engines at various power settings, various altitudes, various configurations. They ran smoothly, powerfully, reliably. He tested the weapons systems, the hydraulics, the electrical systems, everything. After 45 minutes, he brought the Lightning back to Guidonia and landed. He climbed out of the cockpit, removed his flight helmet, and stood silently for almost a full minute while mechanics and fellow pilots waited. Finally, someone asked the question everyone wanted answered. Well, is it as clumsy as we thought? Gorrini looked at him, looked at the other pilots gathered around, and said quietly, "It will kill us. All of us. If they have enough of these, it will kill every Italian fighter pilot in the sky." The silence that followed was absolute. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The briefing room at Guidonia Airfield was packed. Every available fighter pilot, every squadron commander, every tactical officer who could be spared from operations had been summoned. They sat in rows, smoking, talking quietly, wondering why Capitano Gorrini had called this emergency meeting. Some had heard rumours about the captured P-38. Most assumed this would be another technical briefing about enemy aircraft capabilities, useful but routine. They had no idea their entire understanding of aerial combat was about to be demolished. Gorrini stood at the front of the room next to a chalkboard covered with diagrams, performance figures, and tactical notes. He waited until the room fell silent, then began speaking in a calm, measured tone that somehow made his words more disturbing. "Gentlemen, everything we have been taught about twin-engine fighters is wrong. Not partially wrong. Completely, dangerously, fatally wrong." The room erupted in murmurs. Gorrini raised his hand for silence. "I have just completed the first evaluation flight of the captured American P-38 Lightning. What I am about to tell you is based on direct flight testing, not intelligence reports, not second-hand accounts, but my own experience in the cockpit. And I tell you now, this aircraft will change the air war over Italy." He turned to the chalkboard and began writing figures. Maximum speed at 15,000 feet, 365 miles per hour. Maximum speed at 25,000 feet, over 400 miles per hour. Our Matchy C, 202, even the newer C, 205, cannot match this at altitude. One pilot interrupted. "Yes, Capitano, but those are straight-line speeds." In a turning fight, Gorrini cut him off. "In a turning fight, the P-38 will kill you." The room fell silent again. "The Lightning turns. Gentlemen, it turns better than it has any right to. Better than any twin-engine fighter we have encountered. Better than some single-engine fighters I have flown." He let that sink in before continuing. "I tested sustained turns at combat speeds. The Lightning maintained turn rates that rival our Macchi in certain configurations. Not in all configurations, but enough to be deadly." Another pilot stood, clearly agitated. "That is impossible. The aircraft weighs over 15,000 pounds. It has 2 engines, 2 booms, massive wings. It cannot turn like a fighter." Gorrini nodded. "That was my assumption as well. The aircraft proved me wrong. Let me explain why." He drew a diagram on the chalkboard showing the P-38's unusual configuration. The twin-boom design is the key. The engines and their mass are positioned far from the center of the aircraft. The tail surfaces are mounted on the booms, far behind the wings. This creates a long moment arm, a long distance from the center of gravity to the control surfaces. The result is that when the pilot commands a turn, the aircraft responds with surprising authority despite its weight. He drew another diagram showing the wing design. The wings are large, with significant area. This creates tremendous lift at combat speeds. The wing loading, the amount of weight carried per unit of wing area, is actually quite favorable. Combined with the power from 2 engines producing over 2,800 horsepower total, the Lightning has enough excess power to sustain high G turns that would bleed energy from lighter aircraft with less power. One of the squadron commanders, a veteran named Maggiore Paolo Tarantino, spoke up. "But surely there are weaknesses we can exploit. No aircraft is perfect." Gorrini nodded. "Absolutely. The Lightning has vulnerabilities. At low speeds, below 200 miles per hour, our Macchi can outturn it. The Lightning's controls become heavy in tight, slow turns. It is optimized for high-speed combat, not low-speed maneuvering." He wrote more notes on the chalkboard. At low altitude, below 10,000 feet, the Lightning loses some of its performance advantage. The turbochargers that give it exceptional power at high altitude provide less benefit down low. Our fighters can engage more effectively below 10,000 feet. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The engine cooling system is vulnerable. Both engines are liquid-cooled. A single hit to the coolant system, and that engine is finished within minutes. Unlike radial engines that can sustain significant damage, these Allisons require intact cooling systems to survive. Another pilot asked, "What about ammunition? Can we outlast them in a prolonged engagement?" Gorrini shook his head. Unlikely. The Lightning carries 1,500 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and 150 rounds of 20mm cannon shells. That represents approximately 30 to 40 seconds of sustained fire, more than enough to destroy multiple aircraft if the pilot is disciplined. And American pilots are trained to be disciplined. He turned back to face the pilot, being assembled pilots. "Gentlemen, here is the tactical situation as I see it. If we engage P-38 seconds at high altitude, above 15,000 feet, we will be at a significant disadvantage. They are faster, they climb better, and they can sustain combat power where our engines struggle. If we engage at medium altitude, 10 to 15,000 feet, we are evenly matched in some respects, but still disadvantaged in speed and firepower. If we can force them below 10,000 feet and reduce speed below 200 miles per hour, we have a chance." Maggiore Tarantino stood. "So, we engage low and slow. We use our maneuverability advantage. We have done this before against heavier aircraft." Gorrini's expression darkened. "That assumes the Americans will cooperate. That assumes they will descend to our preferred altitude and slow down to our preferred speed. They will not. American doctrine emphasizes speed and altitude. They will stay high, stay fast, and use boom and zoom tactics. Dive, tack, climb away. They will not engage in turning fights at low altitude unless they have no choice." He let the implications settle before delivering the final blow. "And even if we could force them into our preferred engagement envelope, there is one more problem." He paused. "Numbers." The room went completely silent. Intelligence estimates suggest the Americans are producing P-38 seconds at a rate of approximately 400 to 500 per month. Per month, gentlemen. From a single factory complex in California, they are simultaneously producing P-47 Thunderbolts, P-51 Mustangs, P-40 Warhawks, and dozens of other aircraft types. Thousands per month total. He looked around the room at the faces of men who were beginning to understand. Italy's entire aviation industry produces approximately 200 fighters per month of all types. We are losing experienced pilots faster than we can replace them. We are running short of fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and the Americans are sending us aircraft that we cannot match technically, that we cannot match numerically, flown by pilots with more training than our newest pilots will ever receive. One young pilot, barely 20 years old, raised his hand tentatively. "Capitano, are you saying we cannot win?" Gorrini was quiet for a long moment. "I am saying we need to be realistic about our situation. Individual skill, superior tactics, and courage can overcome many disadvantages, but they cannot overcome arithmetic. If the Americans deploy P-38 seconds in large numbers over Italy, our losses will be catastrophic unless we adapt immediately." He turned back to the chalkboard and began writing tactical recommendations. "Here is what we must do. First, avoid high-altitude engagements whenever possible. If we must engage, do so at medium to low altitude where our performance is more competitive. Second, target the cooling systems. The belly radiators on both engines are vulnerable. A single hit can force an engine shutdown. Third, work in pairs or larger formations. The P-38 pilot has excellent visibility, but he cannot watch every direction simultaneously. Coordinated attacks from multiple angles can overwhelm even skilled pilots," he continued writing. "Fourth, use the sun, clouds, and terrain for concealment. The P-38's visibility advantage is negated if we can approach unseen. Fifth, disengage if outnumbered or outpositioned. Pride is not worth dying for. Live to fight another day. Sixth, conserve ammunition. Our 20mm cannon shells are precious. Make every shot count. He stepped back from the chalkboard. These tactics are not guarantees. They are our best chance to survive engagements with an aircraft that is, in many respects, superior to what we fly. Study them, practice them, teach them to every pilot in your squadrons. Maggiore Tarantino stood again. Will we have more opportunities to test the captured Lightning, to practice against it? Gorrini nodded. Yes. I will conduct additional evaluation flights and demonstration sorties. Any pilot who wishes to observe should make themselves available. The more of you who understand this aircraft's capabilities, the better our chances of surviving combat against it. As the briefing concluded and pilots filed out of the room, the mood was somber. These were men who had entered the war with confidence, flying aircraft they believed could match any enemy. That confidence had been slowly eroding through 1943 as American industrial power manifested itself in the skies over Italy. But this briefing, this moment, represented something different. This was the moment when Italy's finest fighter pilots confronted the reality that technical innovation, tactical skill, and individual courage might not be enough. One pilot, a young ace named Tenente Franco Lucchini, stopped on his way out and spoke to Gorrini quietly. Capitano, I have 16 victories. I have shot down Spitfires, Hurricanes, P-42s. I am not afraid of Americans or their machines, but after listening to you today, I am afraid of what is coming, not for myself, but for all the young pilots arriving with 30 hours of training who will face these aircraft. Gorrini put his hand on Lucchini's shoulder. Then we teach them, Franco. We teach them everything we know. We give them every advantage we can, and we hope it is enough. Over the following weeks, Gorrini conducted multiple demonstration flights in the captured P-38. Italian pilots gathered to watch as he put the Lightning through its paces, showing them how it climbed, how it turned, how it accelerated, how it dove. He explained the sound of the engines so they could identify Lightnings by ear during combat. He described the Lightning's typical attack profiles so they could anticipate American tactics. He showed them the vulnerable spots to target. Some pilots walked away from these demonstrations motivated, determined to use the knowledge to survive and prevail. Others walked away with a growing sense of futility. They understood what Gorrini was showing them, but they also understood the larger context. Italy was losing the war. The armistice with the Allies had been signed in September 1943, though fighting continued in German-occupied northern Italy, where fascist forces remained loyal to Mussolini's puppet regime. The Regia Aeronautica had fractured. Some pilots joined the co-belligerent Italian Air Force fighting alongside the Allies. Others remained loyal to the fascist regime in the north, now effectively an auxiliary of the Luftwaffe. Gorrini himself would eventually fly for the co-belligerent forces, bringing his knowledge of the P-38 full circle as he transitioned from studying it as an enemy to flying it as an ally. But in late 1943, standing next to that captured Lightning at Guidonia Airfield, the future was uncertain and the present was grim. What haunted many of these pilots was not just the Lightning's capabilities, but what it represented. This was one aircraft type among many. The Americans were simultaneously fielding P-47 Thunderbolts, massive fighters that could absorb incredible damage. They were deploying P-51 Mustangs with range to escort bombers all the way to targets deep in Europe. They were sending waves of B-17 and B-24 heavy bombers in formations of hundreds. And behind all of it was an industrial base that Italy could not match, could not comprehend, could barely imagine. One Italian engineer who examined the Lightning wrote in his private diary, and his words were discovered decades later. We have been building aircraft like craftsmen building furniture, each one individual, each one requiring skilled hands and careful attention. The Americans build aircraft like Ford builds automobiles. Standardized parts, assembly lines, interchangeable components. Thousands of workers who each perform one task efficiently, rather than craftsmen who perform many tasks adequately. We cannot compete with this. Our entire philosophy of manufacturing is generations behind theirs. The captured P-38 Lightning at Guidonia became something of a legend within Italian aviation circles. Pilots who had never seen it in person heard stories about Gorrini's evaluation flights, about the briefings, about the disturbing conclusions. Some dismissed the reports as defeatist propaganda. Others took them seriously and adjusted their tactics accordingly. And a very few, actually got the chance to fly it themselves. One of those pilots was Tenente Adriano Visconti, another experienced Italian ace with multiple victories to his credit. Visconti was known for his aggressive flying style and his willingness to engage any enemy regardless of the odds. When he climbed into the Lightning's cockpit in early November 1943, he expected to find weaknesses that Gorrini had missed. He expected to prove that Italian fighters could still dominate in the hands of skilled pilots. 40 minutes later, he landed with a very different perspective. His report, preserved in Italian military archives, is brutally honest. The P-38 Lightning is the most formidable fighter aircraft I have flown. Its combination of speed, climb rate, firepower, and maneuverability is unprecedented. Claims that twin-engine fighters cannot dogfight are proven false by this machine. In the hands of a competent pilot with altitude and speed advantage, the Lightning is nearly untouchable. Our best hope is to avoid engagement entirely, or to force combat at low altitude and low speed, where our lighter fighters retain some advantage. Even then, the outcome is far from certain. Visconti's assessment included detailed technical observations. He noted that the Lightning's cockpit layout was logical and well-designed, with controls positioned for easy access during high-G maneuvers. He observed that the tricycle landing gear, unusual for the time, made ground handling easier and safer than conventional tail-dragger configurations. He praised the concentrated nose armament, noting that American pilots did not need to worry about harmonizing guns from multiple wing positions. Everything fired along the same axis. But he also noted vulnerabilities. The liquid-cooled engines required careful monitoring of coolant temperatures. Aggressive maneuvering at low altitude in hot weather could cause overheating. The long nose could restrict forward visibility during steep climbs. The complex turbocharger systems required skilled maintenance. The aircraft was less forgiving of pilot errors than lighter, simpler fighters. Yet, even as Visconti documented these weaknesses, he acknowledged they were minor compared to the Lightning's strengths. His conclusion echoed Gorrini's. Italian pilots facing P-38 seconds in combat needed to be exceptionally skilled, exceptionally careful, and exceptionally lucky. By late 1943, those three qualities were in increasingly short supply. The air war over Italy had intensified dramatically. Allied air forces, operating from bases in southern Italy and North Africa, were conducting round-the-clock bombing campaigns against German and fascist positions in the north. P-38 Lightnings appeared with increasing frequency, escorting bomber formations and conducting fighter sweeps. Italian and German pilots scrambled to intercept them, and the results were devastating. Combat reports from this period tell a grim story. Italian pilots, flying Machi C-202 seconds and the newer C-205 Veltros, engaged P-38 formations and suffered heavy losses. The Lightning's speed advantage allowed them to dictate the terms of engagement. They would dive from high altitude, make slashing attacks with their concentrated firepower, then climb away before Italian fighters could respond. Attempts to pursue them at high altitude proved futile. The Lightning simply outran and outclimbed anything Italy had. One particularly telling engagement occurred on November 28, 1943, over the Adriatic coast. A formation of 8 Macchi-C, 205 fighters, some of Italy's best aircraft, intercepted a group of 12 P-38 Lightnings, escorting B-17 bombers. The Italian pilots attempted to use tactics learned from Gorrini's briefings. They tried to force the Lightnings into low-altitude turning fights. They aimed for the engine cooling systems. They worked in coordinated pairs. It made no difference. The Americans simply refused to descend. They maintained altitude and speed, using their performance advantage to dictate the engagement. When Italian fighters climbed to attack, the Lightnings dove through the formation, fired devastating bursts from their nose-mounted weapons, and climbed away before Italian pilots could react. Within 10 minutes, 3 Italian fighters had been shot down. 2 more were badly damaged and forced to disengage. The P-38 seconds continued escorting their bombers without losing a single aircraft. The surviving Italian pilots returned to base shaken and demoralized. One of them, according to his squadron diary, said, "We did everything we were taught. We used the tactics. We aimed for the vulnerabilities. It did not matter. They were too fast, too high, too well coordinated. It was like trying to fight ghosts. They appeared, killed us, and vanished before we could respond." This was the reality Italian pilots faced in late 1943 and into 1944. Knowledge of the P-38's capabilities did not translate into the ability to counter it effectively. Understanding the enemy's weaknesses did not matter when they refused to expose those weaknesses. Knowing how to win a dogfight was irrelevant when the enemy would not dogfight. The captured Lightning at Guidonia continued to serve as a training tool and intelligence asset for several more months. Italian and German pilots visited to study it, to fly it when possible, to learn from it. But as 1944 progressed and the Allied advance pushed northward, the situation became increasingly desperate. Fuel shortages grounded entire squadrons. Replacement aircraft arrived slowly, if at all. Experienced pilots were killed or captured faster than new pilots could be trained. The Regia Aeronautica, once a proud and capable force, was dying. In June 1944, as Allied forces approached Rome, the decision was made to evacuate the captured P-38 from Guidonia to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. Italian mechanics stripped the aircraft of useful components, removed the engines, and prepared to transport it north. But logistics were chaotic, transportation was unreliable, and the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Somewhere during the evacuation, the Lightning was lost. Some records suggest it was destroyed in an Allied bombing raid. Others indicate it may have been abandoned and later recovered by advancing American forces. The truth, like so much from that period, has been lost to history. What is not lost is the impact that aircraft had on the men who flew it and studied it. Luigi Gorrini survived the war and lived until 2013. In interviews late in his life, he occasionally mentioned the captured P-38. He spoke about it with a mixture of professional respect and lingering sadness. "It was a magnificent aircraft," he said in one interview. "Beautifully designed, powerfully armed, exceptionally capable. Flying it was a privilege. Fighting against it was a nightmare." When asked if knowledge of the Lightning's capabilities had helped Italian pilots survive, Gorrini was characteristically honest. "It helped some. The pilots who listened, who adapted their tactics, who avoided foolish heroics, some of them survived. But knowledge alone was not enough. We were outnumbered, outproduced, outfought. No amount of tactical brilliance could overcome those realities." Adriano Visconti, the other pilot, who extensively tested the captured Lightning, did not survive the war. He was killed in April 1945, just weeks before the German surrender, shot down while flying one of the few remaining Italian fighters still operational. He was 29 years old. In his personal effects, recovered after his death, was a worn notebook containing detailed observations about the P-38 Lightning. The final entry, dated March 1945, read simply, "I wish we had built this instead of studying it." That sentiment captures something profound about the Italian experience with the captured P-38. It was not just an aircraft, it was a mirror reflecting Italy's industrial inadequacy, its tactical limitations, its strategic helplessness. Every perfectly machined component, every sophisticated system, every standardized part reminded Italian engineers and pilots of what they could not build, could not match, could not overcome. The story of Italian pilots and the captured P-38. Lightning is often overlooked in histories of World War II. It lacks the drama of major battles or the importance of strategic turning points. But in many ways, it reveals a deeper truth about how wars are won and lost. Wars are not just about courage or skill or tactical brilliance, though all of those matter. Wars are about industrial capacity, resource management, training pipelines, logistics networks, and economic strength. By every one of those measures, Italy was hopelessly overmatched by late 1943. The P-38 Lightning was simply the physical manifestation of that mismatch. It was proof, tangible and undeniable, that American industry could produce quality and quantity simultaneously. That American pilots could be trained extensively before entering combat. That American doctrine emphasized the strengths of their equipment rather than trying to compensate for weaknesses. That American logistics could keep aircraft maintained, fueled, and armed even far from home bases. Italian pilots looking at that captured Lightning saw all of this. They saw their own defeat written in every rivet, every wire, every perfectly machined component. And the tragedy is that seeing it changed nothing. Understanding the problem did not provide a solution. Knowing why they were losing did not show them how to win. Some of you watching this might wonder if there were any victories, any moments when Italian pilots using knowledge from the captured Lightning successfully defeated P-38 seconds in combat. The honest answer is very few. There are isolated reports of Italian pilots successfully engaging Lightnings at low altitude, damaging cooling systems, forcing them to disengage. There are a handful of confirmed kills by Italian aces who used the tactics Gorrini recommended, but these were exceptions, not the rule. The vast majority of engagements ended badly for Italian pilots. By mid-1944, P-38 Lightnings were operating over Italy with near impunity. They escorted bombers to targets throughout German-occupied territory. They conducted fighter sweeps that cleared Italian and German fighters from the skies. They attacked ground targets with devastating effectiveness. And Italian pilots, those who remained, could do little but try to survive. The knowledge gained from the captured Lightning had become, ironically, a burden. It told them exactly how good their enemy was. It showed them precisely how hopeless their situation had become. Ignorance might have been easier to bear. There is a photograph, preserved in Italian military archives, that captures something of this moment. It shows Luigi Gorrini standing next to the captured P-38 Lightning at Guidonia Airfield, probably taken in late October or early November 1943. He is in full flight gear, helmet under his arm, looking not at the camera but at the aircraft. His expression is difficult to read. Not fear, exactly. Not despair. Something more complex. The look of a professional confronting an unpleasant truth. The look of a man who has done the math and does not like the answer. That photograph, more than any combat report or technical document, tells the story of what that captured Lightning meant to Italian pilots. It was not just an enemy aircraft. It was a revelation, a prophecy, a warning they could not heed. Modern audiences sometimes romanticize World War II air combat. We imagine knights of the air, individual duels of skill and courage, the better pilot emerging victorious. And sometimes, in small moments, it was like that. But more often, especially by late 1943, it was industrial warfare. It was formations of dozens or hundreds of aircraft, pilots with hundreds of hours of training, flying machines built to exacting standards, supported by vast logistics networks and unlimited resources. Italian pilots, no matter how skilled or brave, could not compete with that. The captured P-38 Lightning proved it beyond doubt. What? Other stories from World War II reveal similar moments of realization? What other times did pilots or soldiers or engineers look at enemy equipment and understand, truly understand, the scope of what they faced? History is full of these quiet moments of comprehension, these instances when the illusions fall away and reality becomes undeniable. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.